All right. Well, welcome everyone to another episode of Sales Pipeline Radio. My name is Matt Hines. I am your host, and thank you very much for joining us today. If you're joining us live on the middle of your workday, thank you so much for joining us on LinkedIn or Facebook. If you are on LinkedIn and watching this live, you can be part of the show today. Feel free to throw in a comment, throw in a question for myself or our guest today, and we'll bring you into the show and make you part of this podcast as well. If you're watching on demand or listening through the podcast feed on Podbean, thank you so much for downloading, for subscribing. You can catch every episode of Sales Pipeline Radio, past, present, and future at salespipelineradio.com. Always featuring some of the best and brightest minds in B2B sales and marketing, telling us the latest, what's working, what's not, best practices, as well as cautionary tales. Excited today to have the VP of Demand Gen at Constant Contact, also a proud Florida Gator, Eric Stockton. Eric, how you doing today?
I'm good. How are you, Matt?
Now I knew the fact is you're a Florida Gator. The proud part I kind of made that up, but I'm assuming.
Oh yeah. So I went to UF during the glory years, so I'm definitely a Gator fan. So
okay, awesome. Yeah. Glory years meaning Tebow years. Like what glory years are we talking about here?
Oh well, actually the Danny Werfel years. So this would be like the end of late '90s, mid late '90s.
So there's multiple glory. This is a nice thing about being a part of a top tier SEC school. You got which glory years are we talking about here?
That's right. That's right. That's right.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining us today. Excited to just talk about kind of where we are now in the kind of state of demand gen, so to speak, right? You've been, I know you've been with Constant Contact and with Sharp Spring for a while, and so have been in the trenches sort of making this work during, post pandemic. And I think a lot of things that were sort of slowly trickling into existence 2 years ago have really blossomed into, fixtures of demand gen now. So we'd love to maybe just have you start with just who you are, your role at Constant Contact and some of the trends you're seeing really be present and priorities in demand gen today.
Yeah, so appreciate it. So I run the marketing for the Sharp Spring product, and Sharp Spring is a full-blown marketing automation and CRM platform. So what we do is, as a product, we'll do full funnel all the way from beginning to end. So I like to say that because I really do I sort of drink my own champagne when we actually use the product and we're doing the work that we do on the demand side. We were acquired, as you said, September. So however many months ago that was, seems like a long time. But we were acquired by Constant Contact about 6 months ago. And, we've been working through what does it look like to become, part of a larger organization like Constant Contact, and how do we sell the product that we have within that larger context. So there's a lot of brand discussion that happens. There's a lot of other things that are going on as it relates to demand gen. And the way that I look at demand is, it's not in a silo, right? So it's not one of these things where it's just purely acquisition of traffic and driving leads. It's really from brand and understanding what our story is and understanding what our take on the world is, and all the way through content, all the way through, user experience on the site, all the way through to, the pipeline, and driving revenue. So it's really holistic, and I think if you do demand right, it has to be a holistic function. And so in a lot of ways, I spend a lot of time with, cross-functional teams, just getting all of that alignment and being able to be effective at the job.
Well, there's a lot of different places we can go there. Couple sort of follow-up questions. I think there's certainly a lot of companies sort of thinking about that balance between brand and demand, and they are not mutually exclusive. People think, well, I'm focused on my brand, and so where's my pipeline? Well, if you want to drive pipeline, having a great brand certainly is grease to the wheels, and so they work together. How do you think about that interplay and priorities from sort of an execution in a strategy standpoint?
Yeah, so brand absolutely is the core product, or the core outcome of doing demand well, right? So when you're building a story and you're talking about how your product connects to the pain points that your audience has in all of these various channels that you are running media against, you are creating that, right? And you're leveraging a brand that you are becoming known for. In a lot of ways, I think demand helps to accelerate brand in the brand team. So traditionally in organizations, brand was like this big thing. You had budget that was sort of nebulous, and you had content and you had messaging and you had PR, and they sort of lived over here in a silo. And that's really not the case anymore, at least not in our organization. And frankly, I would counsel other organizations to be thinking about it more holistically too, because at the end of the day, you have to connect what we're doing at the brand level to the story that you ultimately tell in these various, paid media channels to, create pipeline and revenue.
So I agree with everything you're saying, and it's easy for you and I to agree to that in the confines of this cozy little podcast. How do you tell that story to
Yeah.
a VP of sales? Like, how do you sort of tell that
Yeah.
story to a CEO or a board? That'd
Yeah.
be like, yeah, brand's nice, but like, how's pipeline? Like,
Yeah.
how many
Yeah.
leads are you generating for us?
Yeah, so that's the only question, right? At the end of the day. So I mean, a marketer's job, in my opinion, is really twofold, right? It's to tell the story really well and really clearly, and it's to generate pipeline and revenue. And marketers tend to be really fuzzy. In my experience, anyway, we tend to be really fuzzy in our communication of the value that we actually bring to the organization. And so at the end of the day, you're absolutely right. The CEO, more importantly, the CFO doesn't give a whit about, like the what I'm going to call the vanity metrics that marketers tend to like to talk about, right? So campaign metrics, things that really are anything before sort of an SQO level, right? So it's how you create pipeline and how that pipeline converts into revenue, how quickly, like how much is it accelerating through the pipeline? Those are the things that really matter. And I think we as marketers have to get better at articulating what that story looks like and what our impact is. So ultimately, you can tell, like you can just tell every single marketer, especially a marketing leader, has been in the room. They've sat at the table with the CEO or CFO, and you start talking about your campaign metrics, and their eyes immediately start to glaze over, right? And what's even worse is if marketing is out there celebrating their wins, they're hitting their top line MQL number or whatever it is, and you're still half of quota on the sales team side. And ultimately, there's a disconnect there, and that creates a credibility problem for you as a marketing leader. So what I try to do is I try to connect the dot, and really I don't talk a lot about upper funnel stuff, right? What I talk about is really at the creation of SQO, right? And that becomes that juncture. Like if you think about your funnel from awareness all the way through to closed won deals, that connection point is really the bridge between what you do in marketing and what sales and the business outcome, what they care about. And if you can get in your language, in your storytelling, in your reporting, as close to that SQO number as possible, like you'll see how that leads to additional credibility. It helps to, obviously get more budget, all of those things that we care about as marketers.
Yeah. I mean, it's sort of the bottom-up approach to sort of marketing planning and marketing ROI is not just saying, well, here's how many clicks and retweets I got, or here's how much
Yeah,
traffic we got, but
that's
here's
right.
the contribution of marketing to
That's right.
pipeline and closed deals, or
Yeah.
here's what it's worth for us to get a deal. Here's what it's worth
Yes.
for us to get a marketing sourced SQL from a legitimate qualified account, and saying that now I can invest in a body of work to get a certain volume of those SQLs. And
Yep.
I've found that with some CFOs, it's, you start from the bottom up and you say, here's what I'm willing to spend to get there. They're
Yep.
less in the weeds on the channels.
Yep.
And just let's not pretend, depending on the deal you're selling, that you're going to get white paper selling the big deal. But like it's a body of work to get there. The bottoms up
Yep.
approach sometimes helps grease the wheels on all fronts there.
And also laying that comparison against what we're currently doing today, right?
Right.
So, if we're sales led, where you've got a strong outbound motion, whatever it is, right? That is, fundamentally relatively inefficient. And what does it cost to get an SQO there, right? What does it cost to get a closed won deal there? And then run a comparison against that based on what you're doing on the inbound side. at the end of the day, it's pretty easy, like, to look at, but we don't, like, as marketers, again, we need to drive that conversation to that point where we're showing it side by side. What I find is a lot of these, non-marketing executives tend to struggle with what questions that they need to ask in order to zero in on what's most important. Because they struggle with the sort of the old concept of, okay, well, this is what a funnel looks like, and I should be asking about traffic, and I should be asking about MQLs, and I should be asking about, whatever. But that actually fundamentally, and that's what they measure on, that's what they compensate on, like, that's what they build the organization around, that's what they request marketing to report on. But it's up to marketing really to lead that conversation and say, look, yeah, those are all important things, but that's not the most important. What the most important thing is this, right? And you show how the reporting, or sorry, how the actual inbound motion works, how efficient it is from a CAC perspective, right? And then, and also, like, how it's contributing significantly to that pipeline of the sales team. And then on the other side, you're showing, like, what are the other things that we're also allocating dollars to? And you start talking that language of the CEO, CFO, and it helps to start to direct the conversation to things that are more important to the organization rather than those vanity metrics like we were talking about before.
Boy, you just start speaking the language of the business, start using the language of the business, using the metrics and the key and the words that the CFO uses. You certainly sort of reduce
Yeah.
friction between the organizations and help marketing tell a better story. We're speaking today on Sales Pipeline Radio with established, proud Florida Gator and VP of Demand Gen at Constant Contact, Eric Stockton. So before you were VP of Demand Gen at Constant Contact, you basically ran the Sharp Springs ad business. And so,
Yeah.
Sharp Springs ads, like, you can focus on sort of like a product, right? And sort of,
Yeah.
a lot of people that, listen to the show, have either been acquired or their companies have acquired other companies. So you go from necessarily having sort of like a suite of services that all sort of like one product to having sort of a portfolio of things that, with a common set of customers, right? So talk a little bit about what that transition's like, and without giving any sort of secrets, just what has that transition been like for you, and what have you learned along the way of moving from selling one thing to sort of being part of a portfolio?
Yeah. Honestly, it's been fun. It has put us in a position where, constant. I mean, look, I totally am gonna just discount all of this by saying, like, this is my experience, not everybody's experience. But our experience, or my experience, has actually been really positive in the fact that, the parent company, Constant Contact, is really wanting to invest in areas that help to inform, or help to serve their customers better, right? So there's a very large customer base of smaller customers, as you might imagine, that are, solopreneurs and early stage, uh, smaller customers that are sending email and doing marketing. But they have a larger and broader group of folks that are getting more complicated, right? They want a solution that grows with their business. And what SharpSpring does is helps to solve that particular problem. So, what are the challenges? Well, integration is a challenge, right? So, like, what does it mean? And literally had this meeting this morning, Matt. Like, literally had this meeting where we were talking about the brand of Constant Contact as a, overall, right? And we were talking about the products that live in that brand and how do they all align with with the core values of the brand. And like, how do we talk about them in context of not only like within our own customer base to acquire new customers, right? But also, in context to the other products, and also within the context of the umbrella. That's not an easy thing. Obviously, we've got a lot of smart people that are working on it, but I think the challenge is maintaining your own customer, like, audience, and being really good about that, because
Yeah.
if we lose that, then what we end up having is, we end up becoming sort of this brand that nobody knows what we do, right? So we want to, like, and we have been doubling down and investing as Constant Contact to make sure that we're talking about the audience first, right? And who it is that we serve. And then, how do they, what does that buyer journey look like? And then ultimately, how does that make its way all the way through into product? And then we start talking about how do they relate it to each other, right? And what is that, what does that path look like? So it's a lot. Like, we went from 250 people to 1,250 people, right? So, or something like that. So it's, organizationally much larger organization, lots of new faces that I have to interact with and work with. But, so far, it's been, I think it's been relatively smooth.
That's great. No, that's great. And I love your comment about just keeping that customer focus. I mean, I've seen best practices and cautionary tales in this scenario that really sort of pivot on that, right? Like if you have a customer focus as you expand the portfolio, what you can sell, then you make the right trade-offs. If you have fiefdom fights across business units and products, you have a problem, right? And so, what would your advice be based on what you've seen so far as Constant Contact, as well as just throughout your career, for those that are in what really kind of can sometimes become a political situation where you've got different business units fighting for attention, prioritize our product, no, sell our product, we need more leads. Like, how do you maintain that customer centricity? How do you justify and evangelize that?
Yeah. So like, first of all, like everybody is going to have that, I mean, it is just a function of human beings and human nature. And, it's just common. I think the thing that we have realized is that the data really helps to, equal out the playing field, right? So we're a smaller, like SharpSpring is a smaller brand, obviously, than the larger Constant Contact brand. And what we're doing is we're telling the story with, what is the customer, what is it worth, like how do we think about it, and how do we overlay that against sort of the larger, strategic narrative, strategic, business decisions that we're making around things like, where we invest dollars, right? And so, but like my thing would be come to the table with data, because if you don't, what typically happens is the hippo in the room is typically the one that's going to end up making the decision, which may not be the best, for the product or for the organization. And we're a very data centric organization. So I think, that obviously helps my, sort of my cause, or, like if I'm an owner of a product or whatever, I want to be able to do that. So it always helps when the organization is already leaning in that direction. But then it's my job to be able to come to the table with that argument, or with that, with the data to be able to support it. So yeah, it's the great equalizer.
Love it. Awesome. Well, appreciate your time today. Eric Stockton, VP of Demand Gen at Constant Contact. Thanks so much for joining us, and say hi to the head ball coach for us.
All right. Thanks, Matt.
All right, man. Thanks everyone for watching another episode of Sales Pipeline Radio. We'll be back here again next week, 11:30 Pacific, 2:30 Eastern. Until then, my name is Matt Hines. We'll see you next week on Sales Pipeline Radio.